19, which is where we are, we're seeing the moral degradation in Israel during the 300-year period of the Judges. Moral degradation. In 17 and 18, we saw their spiritual fall. In 19, 20, and 21, we see their moral fall. And for 15 verses, the first 15 verses of this chapter, the stage is set for a story that's going to take place after. The first 15 verses are setting up like a good play does. It's setting up characters. It's setting up the scene. And that's exactly what these first 15 verses are. One thing I should say before we start is that the Levite, listen to me, because if you were here last week, this is news to you. This is a correction. I blame this on Codeine. The Levite involved here is not, N-O-T, capitals, not Aaron's grandson. The Levite here lives in the time period of Aaron's grandson, but this Levite is not Aaron's grandson. Moses' grandson very clearly was the Levite that was involved in Judges 17 and 18. But this Levite is not Aaron's grandson. What I should have said is these events took place during the time in which Aaron's grandson was alive. And the point of that is that it was very early in the years in which Israel had gone into the Promised Land. The fact is, it didn't take Israel very long to fall into the depths of idolatry so much that the moral fabric of the Israelites was faltering. As we see in this story, this happens early in the days in which Israel went into the land behind Joshua. Remember, Judges 19 to 21 highlight moral failure. This failure, again, takes place very early. It's in full swing in the very early years of the book of Judges. A quick timeline, just to get us all on the same page, thinking right about the time period here. 1446 is Israel's exodus from Egypt. This is the burning bush. This is when God, Exodus chapter 3, when God comes to Moses. It says, go to Pharaoh, tell Pharaoh it's time to let my people go. 1,446 years before Jesus is born. That's when that event takes place. Remember, it took 40 years after the Exodus that Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years because they were disobedient to the words of Yahweh, go in and take the land. And they were fearful of it. Remember the idea of the 12 spies that went into the land fearful. 10 of them were fearful. 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, said, yes, we should take the land. The rest said, no, we can't do it. They're giants and their cities are too fortified. So God said, because of that, because you don't believe me and trust that I can give you the land, you will wander in this wilderness for 40 years until all of you adults, all of you men from 20 years and up are all killed in the wilderness by God himself. You will wander 40 years. So that happens. And in 1406, Israel, this is just a fact. It's just a fact. The Bible gives us a timeline. Israel captures 2 cities, Heshbon and Aroer from Sihon under Moses' leadership. The only reason I say that is because Moses is still alive in 1406. And in 1406, Moses dies, and Joshua would lead the Israelites into the Promised Land. So 300 years go by, according to the book of Judges. I can't go through all this history again, but 300 years go by. But in 1406, things started to happen. Israel enters the Promised Land behind Joshua. Following Joshua as their leader, Israel will go into the land God promised Abraham 400 or 500 years earlier. Finally, they're going into the land. Something else occurs at the beginning. At 1406 BC, the conquests begin. Joshua's a military leader. Joshua gathers the armies of Israel to fight against the kings, the leaders in the land of Canaan, to destroy the power of the most powerful kings. And that conquest we see lasts in the book of Joshua for 7 short years. I'm trying to paint a timeline of just how soon it is that given everything, Israel turns away from God and how quickly the generations, not 10, 12 generations from now, but how very quickly the generations of Israelites turn into spiritual and moral degenerates. And the story in Judges chapter 19 through 21 is one of moral degeneracy in its worst form. It didn't take them long to get to that. The conquest for the land lasts 7 years, so where are we now? We're in like 1398. Not many years have gone by, and Joshua's done his job. And then Israel, as we see in the Scripture, Israel obeys Yahweh during Joshua's lifetime. We don't know exactly how many years after the conquests are finished that Joshua remains alive on earth, but we are told in the Scripture, in this verse, in Judges chapter 2, verse 7, that while Joshua was alive, Israel followed him spiritually. They were obedient. Grandpas have that sway on their families, don't they? Good spiritual men, good spiritual grandfathers and fathers can hold the line in their family. Their families won't do things while they're alive. It's amazing how quickly, when a good, godly, spiritual grandfather dies, how quickly those that want to roam begin to roam. In Judges chapter 2, verse 7, the Bible says the people served Yahweh, that's the God of Israel, the God that presented himself to Moses, let my people go. He presented himself with this name, Yahweh. When you see the Lord in all capitals, it's translating the Hebrew name that God gave Moses when he asked him, Lord, who do I tell them sent me? Under whose authority am I going to do these things? He said, you tell them that I am sent you. And that's where we get the word Yahweh from, that is translated Lord. So this is the God of Israel. The people served Yahweh, the one true God, the only God that's ever existed or ever will, all the days of Joshua. He had that influence on the generation. All the days of the elders who survived Joshua. So even after Joshua's death, there were at least a few years in which the elders who were his right-hand men still held Israel together spiritually and morally. Call it peer pressure, if you will. This generation who had seen all the great work of Yahweh which he had done for Israel. And back to this slide, Israel obeys Yahweh during Joshua's lifetime. But what happens after Joshua dies? Israel disobeys Yahweh once Joshua dies. Once Joshua and all the elders that were in charge with Joshua die, the sheep scatter. Look what it says in Judges chapter 2, the same chapter, just a couple of verses down. All that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation. The very next generation. We're not talking about 100 years down the road. We're talking about the very next generation of sons and daughters rose up. There arose another generation after them who did not know Yahweh, nor yet the work which he had done for Israel. And look what it says, because they chose not to know Yahweh. In Judges 2, verse 11, the very next verse, it says, then the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of Yahweh and served the Baals. How many years have gone by? Look at this again. How many years could possibly have gone by? 1406, they go into the land. Joshua leads them for 7 years. After that, he lives however many years he lives. Call it 15 years, 20 years, 5 years, it doesn't matter. A few short years after that, all the men that ruled with Joshua are gone. 20, 25 years into the land of Canaan, and what do we have? The sons of Israel did evil in the sight of Yahweh and served the Baals. They turned away from worshiping the one true God and almost, I would use the word immediately, went to do what was right in their own eyes, which is the theme of the book of Judges. There's no king in Israel in those days, and each man did what was right in their own eyes. So they were attracted by the immorality, let's say, of the Baal worship with the cult prostitutes, the female prostitutes, the male prostitutes, the way they served their gods was sexually immoral, and Israel said, we're in. They forsook Yahweh. They abandoned Yahweh, the God of their fathers, who brought them up out of the land of Egypt, and they followed other gods from among the gods of the peoples, the Canaanites who were around them. That's what Israel chose. We no longer want to follow the one true God. We want to worship the way we want to worship, and the way those pagans are worshiping is much funner than this whole Moses law thing. They bowed themselves down to the false gods, and thus Yahweh, the true God, was provoked to anger. And then we have the cycle of the book of Judges begin, when Yahweh would bring a foreign nation against Israel. So remember, we see in Judges 19, 20, and 21, the moral collapse of Israel. And what I'm trying to tell you by showing you all these verses is that it didn't take long. Unfortunately, I don't like this fact. It's a fact of the Scripture. It's a historical fact. You walk away from God, buddy, your days are numbered, and it will not take long. That's what we see here. Walk away from God, moral degeneration. It didn't take, as I said a couple of seconds ago, many generations for the society to crumble. It took one generation. Joshua's gone with his generation. The very next generation of men and women in Israel forsook the Lord, chose to worship false gods in a way that they saw as more attractive to them. One generation, Israel is totally a disintegrated community, spiritually and morally. The proof of the timing is in Judges chapter 20, verse 27. The proof of the timing. Why do I know it happened so early in the days of this 300-year period that Judges covered? How do we know that it happened at the very beginning, this atrocity that's going to happen with this Levite, his concubine, and the men of Gibeah in Benjamin? Because the book says it. In Judges chapter 20, we'll see this next week, the sons of Israel inquired of Yahweh. So the sons of Israel have a beef against their brother Benjamin, and they go to the high priest, and they're asking of the Lord through the high priest, what shall we do about our brother Benjamin? And this is where it gives us the timeline. It says the sons of Israel inquired of the Lord. Where do you do that? Where's the high priest? What city? Well, it's in Shiloh. That's kind of a trick question, but why would he go there? The tabernacle is there. The Ark of the Covenant of God was there in those days, and here's the timeline, here's the stamp of history. Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, Aaron's son, stood before it to minister in those days. So in Judges chapter 19, 20, and 21, we are talking about not Aaron's son, Aaron is Moses' brother, and not Aaron's son Eleazar, but Eleazar's son Phinehas. We're talking about a very short number of years has gone by, maybe 40, 45, 50 years max, when this event takes place, Israel being in the land of Canaan. Maybe fewer years than that. But not a long time. This happens early. And so you see all that we've gone over, Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, all the judges, Gideon, all the judges that we've seen, Samson, and all that 300-year time period, all that time Israel was spiritually and morally bankrupt. And that's what this story, that's why God chooses to put 17 and 18 in there to show that they were spiritually bankrupt in the days of Moses' own grandson, Jonathan. And now we see they're morally bankrupt in the same days. Not the grandson of Moses here, but the grandson of Aaron in that time period, very shortly after Israel went into the land. They are already completely disintegrated as a society because they walked away from Yahweh. So it's Phinehas who stands as the high priest, and Israel asks, through Phinehas, shall I yet again go out to battle against the sons of my brother Benjamin, or shall I cease? We'll get to that part of the story later. I just want to show you when it happens. Very, very early in the years when Israel has been finally given everything. They've got the priesthood. They're the children of God, the called out nation. They've got the tabernacle erected. They've got everything that God ever gave them. And finally, instead of wandering in the wilderness, they are in the land God promised Abraham, in their own plot of land on earth. And you'd think that would be enough, but it wasn't. And very soon after that, they chose to walk away from the Lord and enter this spiritual and moral decline. The decline, once you walk away from the Lord, how long does it take? No time at all. It's rapid and it's unavoidable. The only thing they could have done to halt this downward spiral is to go back to their worship of Yahweh through the Mosaic Law. That was it. But they didn't do that. And so we have the series of the judges in this book. Each man, again, doing what's right in his own eyes. Let's see what it says in the book. We've gone over some of this. We're going to jump through. I'm just going to read a couple of verses to get us back into the story. It came about in those days that there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite, very early in the book of Judges. Remember the timeline. A certain Levite staying in the remote part of the hill country of Ephraim. This is where he lived. This man lived in Ephraim. This Levite. He took a concubine for himself from Bethlehem in Judah. Remember, these are tribes of Israel. These names, Asher, Naphtali, Dan, Ephraim, Manasseh, etc. These are the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 sons of Jacob, and they all had their own plot of land that God, through Joshua, gave them. This man lives in Ephraim. He has found a wife from this area down here in Bethlehem of Judah, and he's moved her back into Ephraim with him. That's the story. But she's not a wife. Remember, we talked about this last week. According to the Mosaic Law, the priesthood had the right to marry. But what this priest should have done was take one wife, not a concubine. It at least begs the question, did he already have another wife or multiple wives somewhere else? Why is this woman just a concubine, a second-class wife? But that's what she is. Verse 2 says, but his concubine played the harlot against him. She went and found another lover, and she went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah and was there for a period of 4 months. So the concubine has a fling, let's say, and instead of going back to Ephraim, she decides to go south to Bethlehem to where her father lives, and she is there for a period of 4 months. And then we get into verse 3. Then her husband arose. This is the Levite, the priest man. The husband arose, and he went after her to speak tenderly. Remember, literally, it means from his heart. He went to speak from his heart to her with a purpose. Why did he go? To bring her back. Taking with him, tells who's with him, a servant and a pair of donkeys. So after 4 months, apparently the Levite has decided it's better to live with her than without her. Takes him 4 months to make this decision. Better to live with her than without her, so he goes after this concubine. And he takes with him one man, a servant, and a pair of donkeys. Verse 11, jump down to verse 11 with me. When they were near Jebus, this is the ancient name of Jerusalem. When Israel went into the land of Canaan following Joshua, they were supposed to destroy everything that breathed. God gave them the command to kill 7 nations of the Canaanites, to utterly destroy everybody, man, woman, child, animal, beast, everything that belonged to these 7 nations. And this was one of the nations, the Jebusites, if you go back and look at the lists. But Israel didn't do that. So in the land of Jerusalem here, the ancient land of the city of Jerusalem named Jebus or Jebus, you've still got these pagan, Canaanite, non-Yahweh worshiping people. And so that's what happens. It says her husband arose, went to her to speak to her, and he gets to Jebus, which is Jerusalem. He's got her with him. They're walking back from the land of Judah, and he gets to this area from Bethlehem, a 6-mile walk, I told you last time, right here from Bethlehem to Jerusalem, currently or before known as Jebus. And this is what happens. When they arrived at Jebus, a 6-mile trip, about 2 hours, The day was almost gone. Remember when he left the father-in-law's house, it was becoming evening. The day was almost gone, and the servant said to his master, "Please come, let us turn aside into the city. It's getting dark. We need to stay here. We need to stop traveling and stay here." The city of the Jebusites. However, his master said, remember I told you, Jews do not live in Jerusalem in this day and age, in Jebus. Pagans do. Canaanites do. The Jebusites do. And this is what the Levite says. "We will not turn aside into the city of foreigners who are not the sons of Israel." Because who's better? Jews or Gentiles? The Jews. In this Levite's mind, I will stay with my people or I won't stay anywhere. We will not stay. I will not stay in the city of a pagan. Which is very interesting when you get to the rest of the story. Such allegiance to the men of Israel this man seems to have, but what about his allegiance to the God of Israel? He said to his servant, or it says, "who are not of the sons of Israel, but we will go on as far as Gibeah." So they continue on. This Gibeah right here is not Gibeah. It's somewhere right in here where the word Benjamin is. I thought I had a star. There you go. This is where he decides to walk. It's another 3 or 4 miles, another hour's journey. I won't stay with the Gentiles, the pagans. I'm going to go to my people. And that's what they do. Horrible, horrible mistake. Verse 13, he said to his servant, he continues talking, he says, "Come, let us approach one of these places, a Jewish place, and we will spend the night in Gibeah or Ramah." So he is certain to go past Jebus, ancient Jerusalem. He will not stay among the Gentiles. He's going to continue traveling. And so they did. He's the master. Verse 14, so they passed along and they went their way. And the sun set over them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. These names are important. They're not just dropping names. You've got 3 tribes involved here. The tribe of Ephraim, the tribe of Benjamin, the tribe of Judah, where Bethlehem was. You've got all these 3 tribes of Israel involved in this story. So the sun has gone down and they've made it to this city, Gibeah. They turned aside there. They stopped. These are Jews. We're on safe ground with the people of God, right? Yahweh's own nation of people, the Jews, not those lousy pagan Canaanite Jebusites. Boy, what a mistake. The sun set on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. They turned aside there in order to enter and lodge in Gibeah. And it says, when they entered, they sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house to spend the night. Remember, I told you last time how important hospitality was in the ancient Near East. They would open their homes for 3, 4, 5 days to travelers. But it was a disgrace here that not even their fellow Jews would open their home for this Levite, the tribe of the chosen people. He wouldn't even open the tribe of the chosen leaders, spiritual leaders of Israel. No one in the city of Gibeah, none of his fellow Jews would grant him the hospitality to let him and his servant and his concubine and his 2 donkeys stay in his house. No one took them in. Can you imagine having a missionary come into this church and says, I really could use a bed for the night, and this church just going, oh, not me. You're not staying in my house. And nobody says anything, and the guy's left to go back out onto the street to try to find a place to sleep. That's what we're talking about. It's that disgraceful what occurred here. Israel, in the very early days after coming into the land of Canaan, self-absorbed, paganized, completely Canaanized in their thinking. There's no man, there's no king in Israel, and we will do whatever is right to us. Totally selfish and paganized. So this is what happens. Then behold, in verse 16, this is the continuation of the story. Then behold, an old man Wonder how old this man was. It was from a generation before, or else it wouldn't say old. He's from a generation before, a generation that did things more proper than this generation. Behold, an old man was coming out of the field from his work at evening. The old man from the hill country. Now the man was from the hill country of Ephraim. Now that's the same place that the Levite is from, isn't it? That means he's a traveler. He's in Gibeah of Benjamin, right? Down here. But he's from Ephraim. The Levite is passing through to get back to Ephraim. The old man, for whatever reason, has found work in Gibeah, so he has left Ephraim. They are both travelers. And that's a very interesting thought. Both on the road. Neither one of them in their homeland. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was staying in Gibeah, but the men of the place were Benjamites. They weren't Ephraimites like the Levite and this old man. They were of the tribe of Benjamin. Gibeah is in the land of Benjamin, in the territory of Benjamin. Don't let all these names trip you up. Get your arms around that. The old man and the Levite were from Ephraim. They are in the land of Benjamin right now. One of them there, strictly temporarily, just passing through. That's the Levite with his concubine. The other one seems to have taken up residence there. He's found work there. That's what's going on. Again, I ask the question, I wonder how old the old man is. Only interesting to me because he is not of the generation of the derelicts. He's a generation older than that. A part of a remnant that's still worshiping Yahweh properly, at least in this regard. He is going to take the Levite in when no one else in the city would. So at least he understands enough about his responsibility to do that. He's not one of the tribe of Benjamin. Don't forget that. He is of the tribe of Ephraim. The old man is. He's a traveler himself. He would know the needs of a man that's traveling away from home. He would be more apt to help a fellow traveler. He understands what it is to be a foreigner. Even though he's Jewish, he's not in his home territory. So he knows what it's like. I'm going to make a connection here to the church age and to you and me. He knows the plight of a traveler and was willing to meet the needs of the traveler. You got it? Now, let me ask you a question, Christian. Where, according to the Scripture, does your citizenship lay? According to God, your passport doesn't say United States of America. What does the Christian's passport say? Where is your citizenship? It's in heaven. So what does that make us here on earth? Travelers. That's why we often speak of the Christian life as a sojourn, a trip, a traveling through this generation, through this earth, this mortal life. We are all travelers here as Christians. We are not in our homeland. We are on foreign territory. We're on foreign soil. Representatives, that's also why the Bible calls us ambassadors. Have you ever thought of that? Where are the American ambassadors right now? Are they in America, or have we sent them out to foreign lands to represent the home country, USA? That's what an ambassador is. That's why the New Testament calls the Christians ambassadors. Because our home is in heaven, our citizenship is in heaven, that's our eternal home, it's as good as done. And we are left here to walk through this world as ambassadors, as representatives of the ruler of our homeland. What's his name? Jesus of Nazareth. That's why the Bible says, and why I always say, we're the hands and feet of the Lord Jesus Christ. We're to imitate Him here, mimic Him, live a life, become Christ-like, because we are His ambassadors. We are foreigners on foreign soil. Now let me ask you this question. As foreigners, Shouldn't we understand the plight of each other as travelers and passers through this evil and wicked generation of earth? Yes. And so as all fellow travelers, shouldn't we help each other in meeting each other's needs, any need that arises, because we understand how difficult it is to travel through a land that's not our own? Yes. Hold on to these truths from the Bible. It speaks so much, even in the Old Testament book of Judges, chapter 19. You think, how could this have any connection to what we do? We're all travelers here. We're all on a journey through this space, through this earth and this mortal life. This isn't our home. This isn't our eternal destiny. This body isn't even the body I'll have then. It'll be an eternal form of this body, a resurrected, glorified form of this dying carcass you see in front of you. It won't be identical to this. So nothing about what we're doing here is permanent. It's all temporary. We're all traveling through here on our way to somewhere else, the place where we actually reside and live. And so we should help each other because we're all in this together. How many times have you heard me say we're all in this together, regardless of the plight you're in? We're all in this together. We are all travelers here. And we should understand that about each other and bond together instead of the opposite. Verse 17. He lifted up his eyes, the old man. He saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, "Where are you going and where do you come from?" I can see the urgency. I can hear it in the old man's question. Understanding what we're about to read in the story, the old man knows you have got to get under shelter. You are in danger. Where are you from, and how is it that you're sitting in the open square in this wretched town of Gibeah? You must be saved from this. He said, we're passing from Bethlehem in Judah. Just a quick recap of his story. We're passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote part of the hill country of Ephraim. I've gone to get my concubine in Bethlehem. That's not where I live. I'm just on my way back home. He says, for I am from there, from Ephraim. And I went to Bethlehem in Judah. But now I'm going to my house, and no man will take me into his house. You may have in your translation, I'm going to the house of the Lord. Beit Elohim. I don't know why exactly that's in here. We don't have any indication that this man was going to Shiloh, to the tabernacle. As a matter of fact, when we get a few verses down, it's not translated the house of the Lord. It's very clearly translated my own house. Be that as it may, if you have a different translation, that's what it means. The fact of the matter is he's not staying in Gibeah of Benjamin. He is simply a sojourner, a traveler passing through. That's what he tells the old man. And he also says, not one of my fellow Jews will open his door to me. And he says in the next verse, that's all the more misunderstood by me. I don't understand why, because I have no needs except for a roof over my head. He says in verse 19, yet there is both straw and fodder for our donkeys. We've got what we need to take care of ourselves. All I want is a roof. We have straw and fodder for our donkeys. We have bread and wine for me. I don't need you to feed my animals. I don't need you to feed me or my concubine or my servant. There is no lack of anything. The bottom line is we will be a financial burden to no one. All we want is to get out of the elements to spend the night in someone's house. No one among my fellow Jews, even knowing I'm a Levite, no one will let me into their house. Disgraceful. Verse 20, the old man said, peace to you. Imagine the joy in the old man's ear when he says, when he finds out he's an Ephraimite. We're brothers. You're one of us. I mean, one's a Levite. He's not from the tribe of Ephraim, but at least he lives there. It'd be like you hearing, oh, you're from here, a small town in Texas. Wow, that's great. And you have an instant camaraderie from the same place. The old man said, peace to you. I'm sure he was relieved to know that this was a brother. Only let me take care of all your needs. However, do not spend the night in the open square. Again, the urgency of the danger that only this old man knows is there in the city. The old man, I'll ask the question again, how old was this man? He's at least a generation older, or else it wouldn't say he was an old man. But this man was holding on to the obedience of Yahweh, at least in this regard. The old man was willing to protect the Levite, the traveler, at all costs. You come and stay under my roof. I will take all responsibility for you. In the ancient times, when someone entered into your room, into your house, you took over the responsibility of protection for them. It wasn't just hospitality. It wasn't just a warm meal. When they were under your roof, you were their protector, which is grave as far as what this old man is willing to do for this traveler, as we'll see in just a minute. Big responsibility is what I'm saying. Verse 21, so he took him into his house, and he gave the donkeys fodder. He washed their feet, and they ate and drank. Verse 22 says, while they were celebrating, now the story takes a shift. It seems like everything is secure. They're going to spend the night in the man's house. What could go wrong? And now in verse 22, everything goes wrong. The moral degeneracy of Israel that the author here has played for 21 verses so far, setting up the scene. Finally in verse 22, we see the moral degeneracy, the depths that humans can go to. While they were celebrating, imagine what's going on inside the house, talking about old days in Ephraim. Do you know this city? Have you ever been there? Have you been to Shiloh? Remember Shiloh, the tabernacle is in Ephraim in these days. Talking about the old days, the pleasantries, eating, drinking, having a good time in the safety of the old man's house. Everything ends. While they were celebrating, the men of the city, certain worthless fellows surrounded the house, pounding on the door. Does that sound like any other story? These are Jews, chosen nation, children of Abraham, sons of Jacob, children of the promise, the land, the seed, the blessing, children of the priesthood, children that were supposed to live in such a way as to invite others, to even attract others like a magnet would steel, to attract others, Gentiles, into a worship of Yahweh. That's who these men are, the called men of God. Benjamites, men of the city, worthless fellows. This worthless fellows translates a Hebrew phrase, B'nai Belial, worthless fellows. Belial. Anybody you know, anybody in the Bible have that nickname, Belial? Belial, anybody that you know? Who would be the one that ultimately is Belial in the Scriptures? It came to be Satan. So what it means literally is worthless fellows. That's exactly what sons of Belial means, sons of worthless people, worthless fellows. It came to mean also lawless people, not only worthless, purposeless, but it also came to mean lawless, and then it came to represent Satan himself, the ultimate worthless and lawless being in the universe. Belial, this is where he gets that title, one of his many. Belial, from this phrase, worthless fellows. It's in different places in the Scripture, worthless fellows. But they surrounded the house of this old man, and they're pounding on the door. And they spoke to the owner of the house, the old man, and they said, bring out the man. Catch what's happening here. The men of the city are going to the old man and saying, bring out the man who came into your house that we may have relations with him. Any ideas? One verse, relations with him, translates the Hebrew word yada, Y-A-D-A, and it means to know. It literally means to know. When you use the word intercourse, forget the sexual part. When you use the word intercourse, we're talking about an interchange of communication between two people where you get to know someone better. Social intercourse is part of what we do when we make friends. We get to know each other better. So that's why they use this word yada, to get to know someone better, to have an intercourse with them. But it also has come to mean in the Old Testament very clearly to have sexual intercourse with someone. Remember again who the players are here. In the early years of Israel going into the land of Canaan, the promised land, the players here are Israel, Jew against Jew, brother against brother. And the men of Benjamin here have come knocking on the door of this Ephraimite old man and saying, we don't know who came into your house, but we want to violate him. We want to homosexually rape him tonight. You can't get any more degenerate than this. I'll show you a verse to prove that this word, relations, have relations with, is a sexual connotation. It's very clear here in Genesis 4:1, exact same Greek, Hebrew word yada, and the exact same type of word as far as its conjugation. Now the man had relations with his wife Eve. Same thing, he knew her. And you think, oh, well, maybe that just means they're getting to know each other better. They're having this social intercourse. No, that's not what it means, because look at what the conclusion of the relations were. She got pregnant. She conceived and gave birth to Cain. She said, I've gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. So clearly, in the Old Testament Hebrew, this have relations with, yada is a way of saying have sexual intercourse with. So back to the story here, that's what is happening in Israel. Interesting to me. It would be base enough if the men came and pounded on the door demanding the concubine. We want to rape the woman. That would be base and I can't think of the word, bad. But it's not the woman they want, it's the man they want. I'll ask you again, does this sound like any other story? Do you remember any other incident in the Scriptures in which men of the city are pounding on the door seeking for the men inside the house to come out so that they can have relations with them? Does that remind you of any city? Maybe another Jewish city? Or maybe not another Jewish city? Remember last time we talked about this, that the consequences of walking away from God, and I showed you this sequence of walking away from God and what it looks like. Idolatry obviously is the first. You turn away from the worship of the one true God and start worshiping whatever you want to. And remember, it said after Joshua died, the sons of Israel forsook Yahweh and worshiped false gods, Baal and others. That's where it starts, the walk away from the worship of God. It leads to immorality, which leads to sexual deviance, which leads to political struggles. Welcome to America today, which leads to social disintegration. We're living through this time. Nothing new under the sun. And it leads to eventual civil war, which is what we see in this book. I pray to God it doesn't lead to that in this country, but these are biblical facts. And here, what we see is that the Jews of the tribe of Benjamin wanted to do with this Levite who had come into their own land for protection. Remember, he didn't want to stay in Jabuz because they were pagan Canaanites. He was unsafe there. He wanted to go where he was safe among his brothers, the Jews. And this is what's happening here. Sexual deviance. I want to take you back to another story before we go back into this story. Again, I'll ask the question, do these men pounding on the door, demanding for the person inside to give up a man, does this sound like any other story that you've read in the Bible? What's the answer? Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis 19, verse 2. I mean, good night, friends. We're talking about Israel. And almost word for word through the passage in Genesis 19 and the passage in Judges 19, almost word for word, Israel is a photocopy of Sodom. What happened in Israel? Look at what it says in Genesis 19:2, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. He said, "Now behold, my lords, please turn aside." This is the old man, as it were. It's the old man in that story. "Behold, my lords, please." Who were the lords, by the way? There were two men that came into Sodom. Who were they? What were they, I should say? They were angels in the form of men. So this man is taking them into their house to protect them. "Please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night. Wash your feet." It's exactly what we see in this story. Isn't that what he says? He gave the donkeys fodder. He washed their feet. Look at all the parallels. There's no doubt that God showed the parallels between Sodom and Israel for a reason. The words are identical in a lot of ways. "Spend the night, wash your feet, rise early and go on your way." And they said, however, "No, we shall spend the night in the square." All the same words, the square of the city, etc. In the next couple of verses, before they lay down, they had talked them into it. The man had talked them into coming into their home, into his home, to protect them. And this is what it says. Look at how, follow along in verse 22 of Judges chapter 19, and look how similar the wording is. "Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house." There's no mistaking that God the Holy Spirit is tying these two stories together. You want to know how far you've fallen, Israel? You are in the depths of depravity, just like Sodom was. And if you'll remember, I destroyed her. "The men of Sodom, they surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter, and they called to Lot." Now you remember who it is. It's Abraham's nephew Lot. He's the man that's protecting the angels. "They called to Lot, and they said to him, 'Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us.'" What does it say? "That we may have relations with them." Sodomy, it's in our law book. Homosexual sexual activity, homosexual sex is called sodomy. The people that do this are called sodomites. It's where we get the word from. It's a legal term anymore. So it's you don't have to guess at what "bring them out so that we may have relations with them" means. The stories are very, very intertwined. This is how far Israel had fallen into moral degeneracy. Amazing. "The man, the owner of the house," verse 23. Then the man, the owner of the house, went out to them and said to them, "No, my fellows." I mean, listen to the courage that the man has. You think, what a man of God to protect this Levite at all costs. Well, yeah, just keep reading. He says, "No, my fellows, please do not act so wickedly. Since this man has come into my house, do not commit this act of folly." So according to the old man, to take this man out and to do to him what they wanted to do was folly and wickedness. But not if you do it to my virgin daughter. That'll be fine. Each man did what was right in his own eyes. It's an astounding story of depravity. I wonder if this is why no one wanted to bring this man and his concubine into their house in this city of Gibeah, because they knew what would happen that night. And they knew bringing the man into their house was a commitment to safety. And they knew, I'm not going to take on the mob because I know these people. I know the mob. Just like Lot knew the mob in Sodom. I know this mob. I know who these people are, and I can't take you into my house. Can't do it because I can't protect you. I wonder, we're not told that in the story, but I wonder if they knew sometime in the night there will be a banging on the door from these worthless fellows, these sons of Belial. They will come here. Verse 24, we're stopping here and we'll pick up next week. "Here is my virgin daughter and the concubine," he says. Listen to the courage in his voice in verse 23. "Do not act so wickedly. This man has come into my house. I am his protector. Do not commit this act of folly." Do it to the girls instead. When you see a society disintegrating, look at how they treat their women. When you see a society that's walked away from God, the telltale sign is how they treat their women. And here we see this man say, "Here is my virgin daughter." Can you even imagine for a split second this going through your head? "Here's my virgin daughter and his concubine. Please let me bring them out to you so that you may ravish them and do to them whatever you wish. But do not commit this act of folly against this man." So it wouldn't be an act of folly if you did it to my virgin daughter and the man's concubine? Wow. Watch how people treat their ladies. Watch how a society treats their women. It's a great barometer for the spiritual and moral truths going on in that country. It's debased, isn't it? Hard story to go through. It gets worse. We'll pick that up next week. Let's close in prayer.